Hi, everyone. Welcome back to Title IX Insider. Today we have a wonderful guest and also a member of our team, Debra Marquez, someone that I've actually known for about 5 years now. And we are going to be discussing the topic of DEI, which is diversity, equity, and inclusion. We'll be discussing a little bit about HR, Title VII, and just some other topics surrounding cases that we've seen and information to just support and help individuals out there better understand the landscape of Title VII, Title IX, and also Title VI. So, Debra, would you like to introduce yourself?
All right, thank you, Sandy. So my name is Debra Marquez. I have over 30 years of experience in human resources. The majority of it is in K through 12 education. I recently joined higher education about 6 years ago, and I started in HR, and now I am the Ombuds and Conflict Coach for the university. So I have a very well-rounded background, and I'm excited to have this conversation with you.
Awesome. Thank you. And I'm happy that you've joined our Title IX Consulting Group team as well. And, you and I've always had a wonderful relationship. And, especially when I think about HR and Title IX, I feel like those two worlds always overlap and always work really closely together, regardless if it's K through 12 or higher education, especially because when there's cases that involve employees, that's when the HR component comes into play. As I've said in several of my videos in the past, typically when you have a respondent, the person that's been accused of some sort of Title IX or civil rights complaint, typically it's always best practices for campuses to go towards the HR employee side as the primary lead for that specific case. If there's an employee that's specified as the respondent. And so, Debra, I think it'd be kind of fun for us to just kind of share or talk about, what it does look like from your perspective when you're working with a different department for Title IX, Title VII cases or Title VII and some other overlapping area. Like, what does that feel like? What does that look like?
So primarily HR deals with Title VII, um, and not so much Title IX or Title VI. However, like you said, it does cross over sometimes, and that's when I would have to consult our Title IX person and say, okay, does this belong in my backyard or in yours? And sometimes we just work that out together. I can think of a case a couple of years ago, maybe, where it involved faculty members. And so their immediate response was to reach out to Title IX, when in fact it probably belonged to Title VII. And so, it gets kind of convoluted at time. I don't think people have a real clear understanding of the differences between Title IX and Title VII. So I always try to educate our community on what the differences are and what needs to go where. So it can be convoluted at times though, and it has been in the past.
And that's a fair statement. I think many times individuals don't understand an individual civil right, let alone now combining two to figure out where does this go. And for many reasons, that's why having an open door policy like some campuses that we know have is a good idea because
Mhm.
you want to be able to have the freedom to go to the wrong door in order to then be pointed to where you should actually be going to get that support and help. And,
Mhm.
I'm thinking of, several instances where we had conversations on cases that would come over to the Title IX realm. And I'd, pick up the phone, call you right away and say, hey, this deals with an employee. What should we do? Let's discuss it. And, here you go, basically, because if it's the employee as a respondent, again, it's typically best to send that over to the HR area
Mhm.
with Title IX supporting, of course.
Mhm.
Um, and so, Deborah, in thinking about HR and even the ombuds position, what do you think are some things that students and or parents should always consider or keep in the back of their minds when we're thinking about cases, any kind of case?
Each organization has a variety of resources. And I think for me, because I am a student too, so I know what my needs are. And so I always try to remember what a student needs, and that is support. And parents need support, and they need a place to go when things aren't necessarily going how they think they should go. And so most organizations offer avenues for those folks to take. Um, at least in my experience, through in K through 12, if there's an issue, it usually goes to the supervisor, and then the supervisor will contact HR. And then HR has the obligation to figure out, okay, is this an HR issue? Is it something else? And oftentimes parents will just bypass it all and go straight to the superintendent. And, the superintendent is kind of limited on what they can do because they don't understand the complete issue. They don't know that it's already gone through the proper channels. Um, but parents and students alike should have someone or somewhere that they could go if they're uncertain about which department it goes in. And generally, that's a certain point of contact. Oftentimes, it's the Office of the Ombuds if it's higher education. I don't know that there's a lot of ombuds in K through 12.
And you bring up K through 12, which I think is an interesting space because if parents are skipping, protocol because they don't understand what protocol is, and they go to that superintendent, like what is it that a superintendent should be doing if they are that contact?
So normally the superintendent is not the first point of contact. I think that people generally, when they're having an issue with their students at school, it's very emotional, it's very personal. And if you cannot provide an answer right away or soon enough, that's when they skip everything and just go to the superintendent. But the superintendent is just going to say, I hear you, I appreciate what you're saying, let me get back to you. And they're going to go back through the process and say, okay, here's this parent with this complaint. What have you done? Like who's guiding this process? And oftentimes, I think what happens is if you have um, really good staff, then it should never reach the superintendent until it's gone through all the proper channels. But if you have to let people know, look, maybe I can't help you with this right now. Give me a chance to look into it and I'll get back to you within 24 hours. And then make sure that you do, even if you don't have an answer. You can just, I'm getting back to you. I'm still looking into it. I will get back to you again, and just make sure that you're constantly following up with that person, because that's really all parents want to know, is that you're listening and that you care and that you're going to try to help them solve whatever that issue is. It's when it gets ignored that people get upset and angry and just say, forget this, I'm just going to the superintendent. And if the superintendent doesn't respond, then guess what? They're going to the board of trustees.
Yeah, that's true. And I mean, under Title IX and several of the other civil rights, that's called deliberate indifference. You don't want to have that deliberate indifference to a parent, to a child, to an older student, if they're an adult or later teenager, and just ignore some sort of concern that comes forward. I think that's very interesting. As you were speaking, it made me think about a case that I had. I was the expert on it, and the situation I remember was very interesting because it had gone to the media at one point, and the superintendent was talking of the, K through 12 district, and there was such backlash against the superintendent for not having done his job. And all I could think of as I was reviewing the records, I could see that the staff was doing one thing, the superintendent was doing a completely separate thing, and there was no unison between the two. But from what you're describing, that makes sense because the superintendent is not the staffers that are going to be working on the case, but there should be that communication. Let's pivot a little bit and go over to this DEI conversation because I would love to pick your brain a little bit about it as the
Okay.
Ombuds person, because I know that I know that you're like looking at that topic, you're surrounded with it as well. Um, I'm kind of curious as to like what you're seeing right now across campuses. I know you work at one specific campus, but across campuses and or schools, like what it is you're hearing or seeing regarding the DEI and the changing of names or whatever, however people are reacting to it or responding to it.
So for my own institution, we're not discontinuing our DEI resources or programs. We're renaming the department. But I did attend a conference. Well, I went to a restorative justice conference and also an ombuds conference, and that was like the most popular topic. You know, what are people doing? And it seems to be affecting the larger universities more, public universities. And everybody was honestly just really upset and sad because they're having to close the offices and let people go. They still want to be able to offer services normally under the DEI. And so many are doing what we're doing, which is we're going to continue to offer those services. We're just going to change the name of our office.
You're in California. I know every state is a little different, depending on where you're located. Um, I know in California, DEI is a very powerful statement and very powerful department, that pushes a lot of different agendas forward. So my assumption is that, you are pro DEI. So how do the changes affect you, and like what you're seeing?
Well, I can't say that it's affected me at this point. I think we're still early on in the process to see. I think everybody's just kind of a wait and see kind of attitude. I do support DEI, absolutely. And I think it's important. I know, especially in our community, because we're an underserved community, and we're trying to promote and get more people of color into our schools to serve our community because we want our providers to match what the community looks like. So I would be very disheartened if we had to if we weren't able to fulfill that. As far as other universities, like I said, I have talked to people. Um, it's devastating. It's just devastating across the whole United States. And I think that what I'm hearing is, some people are just uncertain, so they're stressed, they have anxiety, they don't know what's going to happen. I think some people are waiting for case law to see what happens. And it's just such a, I can't even describe it because it's just affected people in so many different ways and none good.
Yeah, I know I've seen so much job loss and a lot of, upsetting circumstances taking place around the country. And yeah, and I'm right there with you. I'm definitely a supporter of DEI. Um, I know I've shared with you in the past, stories of understanding where the Trump administration is coming from when you have those extreme cases and situations. And I'll share here that, I did work with the campus at one point previously, and there was a very strong DEI agenda. I would describe it more on the negative scale, where there was a lot of white person bashing, and there was this sentiment that all white people were bad. And even in the doctoral program, individuals were basically asked to apologize for being white at the beginning of courses in their classes. And that was very upsetting to me when I saw that. Previously at the specific campus I was working at. And, it's disturbing when you see something like that, um, because that's when you're taking DEI towards a negative approach. And, when all of this conversation started happening with the Trump administration, I definitely thought back to those kinds of circumstances because I am aware of other campuses that kind of have that type of framework for
Mhm.
DEI. And so it's very troubling to think that you then have the opposite where there are positive DEI programs that are doing the positive things for the right reasons and with the right approach, and now it's just kind of like black or white. And
Mhm.
it's truly not that way. I'm kind of curious what you think about when I say that example.
When I listen to you speak about it, I feel like we're being taken back 50 years in time. Um, and of course, that's very upsetting. We've made so much progress in our country, and to have it all dismantled by one person in such a short period of time is just beyond me. I don't understand how an individual can get away with all of that. I mean, clearly, in my mind anyway, um, they're not thinking about the country as a whole. And getting rid of these programs, I think, is just going to, I don't even know. I am afraid to see what's going to happen. I feel like, we're going backwards. They're trying to create an all-white country again. And as you and I both know, this is the melting pot. We have people from all different countries, and our country was built by immigrants, and just to see the direction that it's going in is frightening. I just don't even know. Like I said, I take the stance where, okay, let's just kind of see what happens. But every day you hear something about a new order that's been signed to take away yet another privilege from the people.
Minorities, you
Mhm.
know, Latinas. And so it is troubling to see some of the attack, I would describe,
Mhm.
uh, towards the minorities in the country, especially those that are probably a little higher educated, in ways where it almost questions, where you've gotten. And so that is very troubling and, concerning, especially when you start to question, the affirmative action portions of things.
I'm privileged. I've born and raised in the United States, and I do feel privileged. I've been able to pretty much do and go to school wherever I want. I've not really met any problems, and I've always been of the mindset that, I want to get somewhere based on my merit, not because of my color. I never wanted it to be that way. However, this goes way back. I mean, the socially disadvantaged people were not given the same opportunities for education that many of us were. And that's the population that has difficulty taking tests, getting through college, growing those skills. And so I feel like these programs were put in place to help everyone because it shouldn't just be a select few that have those opportunities. It should be open to everyone. And so all of these laws that were put into place to affirmative action, DEI, I feel like it was to help minorities, people of color, to be able to go to college, to be able to serve their country in a positive way. And so if we start taking all of that away, we still haven't dealt with the issue of underprivileged, of underserved, of those that aren't getting the same type of education that others are, depending on where you live. So there's still all of that that's not going away. So I'm not sure what dismantling these programs is meant to do, other than to just continue to promote white supremacy.
Going back to my example of what I saw at a previous institution, if that is the concern, then the solution isn't to dismantle all of DEI. It's to address those institutions that are doing that type of discrimination, that are doing that type of pointed aggression, microaggression to a specific targeted race, whether it's white, black, brown, it doesn't matter. But to than just have a blanket removal of DEI because there's been twisted interpretations of it is a concern. Okay, well, let's go ahead and pivot again. So,
Okay.
Mother's Day is this weekend. Um, how are you feeling about Mother's Day this year? How is it perhaps when we think about a lot of the just the population, I guess, especially we are talking about, minorities right now, what do you think it feels like, if we were to start thinking about moms and their own kids, thinking about their futures with college and or international studies, or I know that I have um, somebody that works on my team and she's here from India and her family is very concerned about, just her studies, her working here at the moment with there being such a high kind of tension, across races and everything. Um, and yeah, so I'm just kind of curious, from a mom perspective, because, I value your opinion and I see you as like this amazing mom. Um, and Mother's Day is here. Just kind of curious what you think about like the moms out there that might be worried about their own kids or, yeah, during these times.
Well, again, I have to say that, my family's been pretty privileged and we haven't had to deal with cases where people are being deported. Even though we are Hispanic, um, we're like third or fourth generation Hispanic. So I don't see it directly happening in our family, but I do see it happening in people that I know, people that I work with, whose spouses are in danger of being deported. Um, I can't imagine what it's like to be a mother with children where either your children are being deported or you're being deported and having to be away from your family. I know in the news not too long ago, there was a report that ICE went out to one of the elementary schools in Los Angeles County. And thankfully, the administration wouldn't let them on campus. Supposedly they just wanted to question the children, but that just makes no sense. What children have nothing to do with it. And it's just a way for them to get to the parents, I think. And we see that people are being deported that shouldn't be deported. And it's just a crying shame. I mean, I can't imagine what it would be like to be a mom that has to worry about that every day.
Yeah, yeah. I think Mother's Day brings so many emotions right now, and it's also Military Awareness Month, and then the military is being changed right now too. It's Trauma Awareness Month, Mental Health Awareness Month, and victim services are being slashed. It's just so much that's happening right now. And I saw in the news here in Virginia, that ICE went over to a Millie's, a restaurant, I think it was yesterday or 2 days ago,
Mhm.
trying to interview all the employees there. And the owner came out and was just kind of speaking against that because he said, these are hardworking people. And, what are we going to do if you just start eliminating every single service person, in the restaurant service area, which are primarily minorities? He said, we're
Mhm.
going to be left with no one.
Mhm.
And, and it's targeting, like you said, sometimes wrongly and deporting these individuals. And yeah, Mother's Day right now, I think, obviously a joyous time for the moms that have their kids near them, but a scary time for the moms that, have children that are being deported or they themselves are being deported or they don't know what's going to happen next week or next month.
Mhm.
Um, and thinking about the school situation in LA, I remember seeing that and hearing about that, and that is frightening.
I was talking to a couple that are friends of mine, and they're white. And when we were talking about what's going on, they said, what's interesting is if you look at people that are begging for money, they're white. They're standing on street corners in front of stores by the freeway. Mexicans are selling things. They're trying to make a living. They're not asking for handouts, which is so true. And supposedly the deportation was going to focus on criminals first. And I don't even know that that's happened. They're not really talking much about that. They are talking about people that have been deported and they shouldn't have been, but are they really looking at the criminals? And I mean, it goes so deep. It's like the only reason we have a drug problem here in America is because people here use drugs. Mexico doesn't have the drug problem that we have, which
Mhm.
I think is really interesting. I'm not sure about other countries, but if there were no buyers, there would be no reason for them to smuggle drugs into the country.
Right. Yeah. I saw there was a snippet that I saw from CNN this week that they spoke to a drug cartel person that was saying just that,
Mhm.
said that things right now are very uncomfortable for them. There's been a bigger crackdown, but he said at the end of the day, our buyers in the United States are the same. So they're
Mhm.
still requesting everything. And it was exactly to your point. It's that the
Mhm.
drugs are being requested, so
Mhm.
there's buyers to make money, which is interesting, and I know something that I'm hearing here in the DC area a lot is about that they are actually going after immigrants that are criminals. But when I hear that, I then hear the opposite, in other circles. So there are two different camps of information that are circling. And at the end of the day, I'm not even sure which one is the truth.
Yeah. Yeah, that's the thing. You don't know who to believe or what to believe, and that's why I limit myself to watching news because even on the internet, I'll see things and I'm like, no, I'm not really even sure that's true.
So, everyone, thank you for joining us. If you've been liking what we're doing, please remember to like and potentially subscribe to us. And Deborah, thank you so much for spending some time with me today to have these quick conversations on some heavy topics. Happy
Thank
Mother's
you,
Day.
Sandy. Happy Mother's Day. Take care.